Hi, this is Nick Hodges, a Delphi product manager at Borland's Developer Tools Group, and welcome to another edition of Turbo Delphi Demos. Today we're going to get right down to the basics, about as far as we can go to the basics of building applications with Delphi. Of course, Turbo Delphi is all about building applications, compiling code into something that people can use. And a lot of times those applications are client applications on a desktop. They can be run and show a window and do things. And Delphi has a certain way of doing that. And the way it does that is very powerful. Delphi makes it very easy to build applications using the classic drag and drop functionality. And we're going to take a look at some of that. Now, the application we're going to build today isn't very functional. Doesn't do a whole lot of things. But I want to take you through the process of building these applications. How Delphi builds applications, how I go about it, what are the basics of it. So first thing we do then, of course, is I can select New Project here, and the New Project dialog, New Items dialog comes up. And you'll notice I have a selection of number of different projects that I can choose from. Console applications, control panel applications, number of different types of applications. But the application we're going to look at today is just a straightforward, standard VCL Forms application. Now, VCL stands for the Visual Component Library, which is a framework of code that enables Delphi to do all of its magic design time and runtime functionality. The Visual Component Library is designed to be component-based, as you might guess, and it allows you to use components at design time to develop and build your application. And components are simply collections of code that are wrapped up in a class, an object-oriented class, that are recognizable to the Delphi IDE, Integrated Development Environment, and thus enable you to use them at design time. We'll see some of those components here in a minute. So I'm going to double-click on VCL Forms application, and we're brought up a basic form project. Now you notice the form here in the Form Designer. If I come down to the bottom and look, you can see I can click on the Code tab, and you'll see that there's code here that defines the form. Here's the designer, and you can see the form. Over on the left, here's the Object Inspector that allows us to set properties on the form. So, for instance, if I want to change the caption of the form, I can change it here by typing my basic application, and you'll notice that the form is smart enough in the designer to get changed based upon my entries changed at design time based upon my entries into the Object Inspector. Okay, so we have a basic form here. We've given it its own title and caption. We can resize the form. If we want to move the form's placement on the screen, we can come down to the little form positioner down here and rearrange it. So I'll move it down sort of to the lower right hand screen there. And we have a basic application. At this point, I'll save the application into the default directory. At this point, we can run the application by pressing the Run button, and you'll see that the IDE will now go into debug mode, and the application will run, and you'll notice it's down in the right-hand corner where I placed it. Of course, that doesn't do anything right now for the end user, but behind the scenes, the VCL, the Visual Component Library, is doing a lot of work to just make that form appear on the screen as if by magic. Now you'll notice that we also have a project manager over here, and it includes the unit for our form and a DFM file for our form. The DFM file represents the visual representation of the form, and the unit is the Pascal or Delphi code unit that contains the code that actually runs and executes when the form is run, when the application is run. So you've got code and a designer both here. Now in the lower right here, you'll notice we have what is called the tool palette. And on the tool palette, there are a collection of components, and they're in different groups: the standard tab, the additional tab, the Win32 tab, whatever, the system tab, Win3. There's a number of different tabs and that hold the over 200 components that come along with the Turbo editions. The components we're going to be most interested in right now are on the standard frame. The first one we're going to do is the button. We're going to drop a T button on the form. It's convention in Pascal or Delphi that I'll type names, and that includes classes, start with a T, standing for type. So T button is a button that you drop on the form. You notice when you drop the button on the form, you get these little blue grippers here, and you can grab the button, you can resize it at design time, you can move the button around if you click and drag on it, hold the button, mouse button down, drag it around. You'll also notice that you start getting these little guidelines that define margins and spacing. See that little black line that pops up there that shows you that you're the right distance away from certain things, and it helps you, those guidelines help you to position your buttons and forms and your controls, I should say, in good locations, proper locations around on the form. Now, of course, when you select a button in the designer, the object inspector recognizes that, and you'll notice now that the button is the item of focus in the object inspector, and you can change the different properties. And I can change, for instance, the caption property, and I'll say press me, like so. And if I were so inclined, I could slide down and change the height property, say to 50, and you'll notice that the height of the button changes. If I change the width to 100, it changes the width. So whatever properties I change in the object inspector, the subsequent changes in the object inspector will be shown subsequently in the designer. Now the button doesn't do a whole lot yet because there's nothing much else to do on the form. So what we'll do is we'll move the button a little bit around here, and then I'm going to grab a T-edit control. T-edit control is a simple edit box into which the user can type text. You can display text, and then the user can type text. So you'll notice now again that instead of just merely the margin guidelines here, now we've got alignment guidelines. And you'll notice that when I grab and move this mouse around, you'll notice that there are a lot of lines appear that allow me to make sure that the edges of the controls on the form line up together, and you'll also notice the little line in between the two controls that defines the margin between controls, and you can set those values and to enable you to make a nice alignments for your controls. So now I have an edit box, and I'm going to change its default text to be blank, and now I have an edit control and a button. And the final control I'm going to add onto this is I'm going to add a T memo. Now a T memo control is a multi-line text editing control, and that enables users to add multiple lines of text instead of just the single line of text like the edit control does. And I'm also going to go to the lines property of the T memo. Going to go to the lines property of the T memo, and I'm going to remove memo 1 so that the memo is empty. Now you'll notice that the object inspector has certain features too. For instance, if I have a little ellipse here on this button, I can press the button and it brings up a property editor so that I can edit the property of the lines property in the property editor. So now we have a simple little form here. I'm going to just size some of these things up using my guidelines so it all looks kind of pretty. And I'm going to add some functionality to this application. So far all I've done is I've moved these moved the components around a little bit, sized them, placed them on the form, and done the things I want to do to make the application look kind of cool. If you wanted to size them up and make it all look very pretty, you can do that in the Visual Designer using the Form Designer, the Object Inspector, the mouse, and the various components. Now I'm going to write a little code, and what I'll do here is Delphi has an event-based model, meaning that events happen when a user does something. And for instance, buttons are commonly pressed. We press the button in an application, and the button will do something. That's something we expect an application to be able to do. Well, in Delphi, the pressing of a button causes a click event, the on-click event, to happen. And thus, we can write some code that will happen when the button is clicked, and that's called creating an event handler. We're going to handle the event of the button being clicked. So if I select the button in the Form Designer and I go over to the Events tab of the Object Inspector, you'll notice that there's an event here called onClick. and I'm going to double click right here in this space here, or I could also, because onClick is the default event for the button, I can double click on the button and it takes me over to the code editor where we have a event handler. It's a procedure, a method on the tform5 class, and it's called button1click, which is a combination of the onClick event name and the name of the button, button1, that we are clicking on. And inside of that code, inside of that event handler, I'm going to write some code. But first, I'm going to go back to the designer, and I'm going to show you too that all of these three components here have names. This is called button1, this is called edit1, and this is called memo1. And I need to know those names in order to write the code that I'm about to write. So I double click on the button, and it takes me to my button event handler. And now I can add some code, and what I want to do is I want to write some code that will take the text in the edit box and move it over to and add it to the next line of the memo control. So what I want to do then is I want to say memo1, which is the name of the memo control, and if I place a period, which is the indicator that I'm going to be looking for a property of the memo1, and up pops my code completion here. Whoops, put it back up there. My code completion, which helps me find different properties on the memo. And the one I'm looking for here is the lines. So if I start typing lines, you'll notice that the code completion filters down to, I typed li, so the code completion filters down to all properties that begin with li. And in this case, there's only one, lines, so I can hit enter. And now I want to add an item to memo1.lines, so I'm going to look for the add function, the add method, and there it is. And now you'll notice that when I do that, it gives me the standard parentheses, and it tells me I need to add a string here. So I'm going to add a string, and the string is going to be whatever the value of edit1 text is. Text is the property on edit1 that holds whatever the edit box is displaying. So now, if I go back to the form designer, what will happen is whatever gets typed into here, I can type something into here, press this button, and then whatever string is here is going to get added into the memo box. So now I'll save my code, and now I can run the project. Excuse me. Now we have my basic application, and I can write Turbo Delphi rocks, and I can add it. And now if I press the button, the text is moved over to here. A very simple basic application, but it shows the basic way that applications are built in Delphi. You create a project with a form, you drag and drop components onto the form, you set their properties in the object inspector, you make them look and appear how you want them to look and appear, and then you can add code to the events that occur when specific user inputs are made to the application. In this case, we created a simple click event for the button click that moved text from here to here. So that's the basics of how a Delphi application is built using the Visual Component Library. I'd like to thank you for hanging around this long through this demo, and please look back to turboexplorer.com or bdn.borland.com for more demos like this. Thank you very much.